this this coming year is a election year for regional elections in 2022. So we'll be looking at some of those things in the near future and trying to get some of those candidates in and having endorsement meetings soon.
I'll post it in the chat.
Great. And so to be need to be a paid member in good standing to be able to vote on those. You need to be a member, well in advance. There's like a 45-day advance kind of there. And so yes, welcome. Let's take a quick look around for what we have for introductions. We start with, if you can see the agenda there. So I'll start with myself. I'm Brian Martin, officer in the club and a longtime founding member of the club, and I'm on the Parks and Recreation Commission as well. And I'll pass it off to Julia to introduce yourself briefly.
Hi, everyone. I'm also an officer at large with the Albany Democratic Club, and I'm a Parks and Recreation Open Space Commissioner with Brian Martin. I'm also co-founder of the Asian Pacific Islander Parents Engagement Group. And so just for you all to know, we're very happy to support other BIPOC and identity groups. So very interested in this conversation tonight. Thanks. Maybe I'll hand it over to Preston.
Thank you, Julia. Preston Jordan, Vice Mayor. Probably enough said. Move it along, get to the meat of the meeting. I will call on Cheryl. Well, she is not showing herself, so maybe I'm calling out of turn, but Cheryl, are you there? Okay, I'll try somebody else.
I am, but I'm going to tell you that I'm in multiple meetings right now.
Okay, all right.
As I always am. But I am here. And yeah.
Right. I'll call on Peter or Pete.
Hi, I'm Pete, former politician and now interested citizen. So I will call on, who can I call on here if I can see the screen? How about Gabby?
Thank you, Peter. Gabby Beatty, treasurer of the club and former member of the Albany Charter Review Committee. Welcome, everybody. Who's left? How about Aaron? Has Aaron introduced himself yet?
I have not. Hey guys, Aaron, secretary of the club, Albany City Council member. I'm not on video because I'm attempting to cook, but I'm listening. Is everybody gone?
I don't think we've heard from Ellen or Jesse, but maybe I'm mistaken.
That's correct.
Let's pass over to Ellen.
Ellen, you want to introduce yourself? You could unmute. And give it another.
I'm
Okay.
Ellen Hershey, and I'm just a longtime community resident who at various times has been a little involved in various initiatives. That's all.
Great, thanks. Jesse?
Hi, it's not actually Jesse, it's Allison Moore. I'm a longtime member of the club and I'm very interested in the topic. So I'm glad to be joining y'all tonight.
Great. And, and Nick, I was just going to say, Nick is joining another meeting, so he will probably be on camera and participating in a little bit, but for now he's just going to be quiet.
Yeah, he said he was on one that started earlier today and it should be done in pretty soon, I think. So he should be able to join us fully soon. And the agenda is posted in the chat. Looks like looks like we are recording this, and we've got we'll have time at the end for announcements about what's happening around town. And so without any further ado, let's see, Nick will give us, when he's back, an update on the Alameda County Democratic Central Committee, what's going on there. He's our representative to that. And without any further ado, Julia, can you take it away and introduce our guests?
Sure. I'll just actually have Brian, Justin, and Greg introduce themselves. But for you all to know, the reason we're very excited to have you here tonight is we wanted to definitely sort of allow for more discussion of things that are presented before the city, you know, very obviously very local topics. And so we are very grateful for you to spend your time here tonight and give us an update and be able to have sort of more of a dialogue with the public than some of the more formal city council meetings where you might be presenting on this topic. So first, I think maybe if you could start, and I'll call on you, just start with an introduction with your name and your role on the task force, and then we have some questions. So Brian, can you start?
Sure. My name is Brian Johns. I've been in Albany for about 15 years now. My role in the task force was to sit on I can't remember what our subcommittee was called, but we were charged with coming up with the model that the city might use for an accountability board. So myself, Justin, and Greg were involved on that committee. And then we had two other subcommittees. One was, I guess, alternative views of public safety. And the third, I think, was a committee that concerned itself with the budget. So that's it for me.
Great, thanks. Justin?
Hi, Justin Locke. I'm a more recent Albany resident. Was previously in El Cerrito. Saw the posting for this task force, and out of interest, not only in the subject matter but in the sort of the topical nature of what this task force was intended to address. Decided to apply to be on it. As Brian mentioned, I serve on the subcommittee with Brian and Greg that was tasked with looking at police accountability and some of the ways that we could implement a mechanism or policy recommendations towards improving that aspect of policing here in Albany.
Great, thanks. And Greg?
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. I joined Brian and Justin on the accountability subcommittee, which Justin narrated the breakdown of the different subcommittees, and had previously been head of the SEJC. And then on a task force that emerged out of the council legislation toward what led eventually to the creation of the subcommittee to sort of set the terms of that. And I'm a professor of slavery, U.S. history, slavery, emancipation, reconstruction at UC Davis. And, do a lot of public history stuff with there, though I'm not a specialist per se on the history of policing.
Great. And so one thing we wanted to just start with is if you could, Greg, if you don't mind giving us a summary of where the task force is at this point, and if that, if that involves a little bit of background on the task force, that's great too. We just sort of a status update on what the task force, where the task force is right now.
Did I see you just unmute, Brian Martin?
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I wouldn't assume everybody's up to speed on all the latest kind of stuff. So if you could give a little background, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great idea.
All right, how about if I start on the background and then turn over to Justin and Brian Johns, can weigh in on where we stand and some of the other things we've done. So there had been go ahead. I see Preston with your hand up.
Yeah, sorry to do this. Realizing that the mayor is a member of the task force and we have 2 council members here on this call, I think it's reasonable for us to hear generally, what's going on in the task force. And I don't expect that you'd be specific to the mayor's perspective anyway, but under state law, if you could avoid being specific to the mayor's perspective, that would prevent myself and Aaron from violating the law. You wouldn't be violating the law the way the law is written. It would be us that would be violating the law by listening to you. So you have the power right now. So please use it judiciously. Thanks.
Well, yeah, but he can state anything that the mayor has stated publicly in the past, right?
Yeah, he can. I mean, if it's in recording, but I imagine he's not going to necessarily do it verbatim. So I'm just saying, that there's a potential risk here.
All right, I'll try to. I appreciate the reminder. I'll try and be very cognizant of it. Of course, the mayor can speak, for herself, and I don't ever claim to be speaking on her behalf. I mean,
I'm sorry again, but the other option is I can just leave for this part of the meeting. I mean, obviously, I have some knowledge about what went on, not a ton of knowledge, but some knowledge. So that would be another way to allow franker conversation. I don't know which is the better way to go.
Well, okay. Well, I think if you don't have any input, Aaron or Preston, if you just listen, I don't think you can.
I will just listen and apologize. I'm still relatively green, only being 10 months into this. So thanks for bearing with me.
I appreciate it. I certainly didn't, didn't come with an intention of conveying anybody else's perspective, and I'll keep my mind on that if something comes up. So I think just in terms of where did the task force come from? I think there had been sporadic. There had certainly been individual questions about policing. In my time on SEJC, and I think in other organizations and in prior time than that. But the movement toward a real organized approach really emerged in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd. There were subsequent, demonstrations in San Pablo. People probably recall Nick Pilch as mayor called a town hall at which a number of both public leaders spoke and also a huge number of comments. Council and SEJC and probably other bodies received quite a large number of public comments. And there was, interest in SEJC of trying to run with that. What emerged from, the various things that circulated at that time was the idea of creating a task force that would be charged with, with developing more immediate plans around policing. Then council approved that. And then there was a group of 4 people that included Nick and included the now mayor that met to sort of talk about composition, size. That was finished last fall. And then there was a selection that happened of people applied, and there was a selection. And then at the end of that process, then it kind of came into being. And it came into being with a pretty broad charge. We can post the link to it if we have access to the chat. If not, you can find it just on Community Task Force on Policing. I'll post the link to that. And so in that context, in which I think I'm given the right link, but if it fails, if it does a weird bend or something, let me know. And you can see there the resolution as well as other information. We had to try and organize ourselves as a new and temporary body to try and, come up with how to fulfill those tasks. And most of us had not, or at least I hadn't met many of the people on there, and we're all virtual. So the subcommittee model, which was, something that was helpful in SEJC, and I assume on a number of other commissions, was a way of doing that. And so we had, kind of voluntary signing up for subcommittees that would be small enough to not have that excitement around the Brown Act. We had presentations from I think I'm going to get the title wrong, so I'm just going to be careful, but with someone with the ACLU of Northern California on different models of policing. We had, communication as a whole group with police chief about a series of questions about policing. And then the accountability subcommittee started to meet. And so originally there was a fourth person who's since moved out of Albany. So it quickly became Justin Locke, Brian Johns, and myself. And, at this point, maybe it makes sense to turn over to them. And then the sort of wrap up after that is we've just started to get more specific follow up from the other subcommittees. So there's a lot TBD about what comes out there.
Yeah, so maybe Justin, if I can turn to you next, and let me know if this isn't appropriate to talk about right now, because one of the questions I have is what were some of the findings? If that's too premature, the other question is, a summary of where you are right now as a task force.
Yeah, so are you referring specifically to the subcommittee or the task force as a whole? I guess I'll start with the latter question. We recently met, for those of you who had the opportunity to perhaps either join in person or to view the recording of that meeting. We're at the point now where, as a whole, I know that the other subcommittees are still working on their recommendations to submit to council, and those other subcommittees being the reimagining task force, reimagining public safety task force, or subcommittee rather, and then also a budget subcommittee. So we haven't heard, we haven't reached sort of finality on what that's going to look like or what will be submitted to city council. But I do believe that will be forthcoming, perhaps in our next meeting, or at least moving closer to that for the second subcommittee, which is the reimagining, and I think I'm going to get the name wrong, but reimagining public safety or reimagining policing subcommittee within the task force. I don't know if Brian or Greg want to speak about where we are in our subcommittee or where we've reached. So I'll hand it over to Brian if there's anything to fill in, or Greg.
Yeah, Brian, it'd be great to hear from you if you could talk about where you are within your subcommittee.
Yeah, I think our work as a subcommittee has largely been completed. Personally, I'm questioning how we should proceed, because I feel like the work, and until there's some kind of board formed, our work is not going to be complete. And I think the completion of our work requires that we stay involved in this process until members of the proposed board or commission are, I don't know, put into office, or however you'd like to term that.
Great, thanks. And I'm sorry, there's a lot of sort of committees and acronyms being thrown around a little bit. Can you tell me what subcommittee are you a part of? The three of you happen to be on the same subcommittee. Obviously, you kind of random chance that the three of you ended up coming to be panelists. But can you tell me specifically the name of your subcommittee within the task force?
I thought our committee was charged with gathering models about how the best advisory commission or accountability commission would be formed.
Oh, I see. Okay. So maybe if we could step back from that, given that sort of but I imagine you've been part of these committee meetings, period, right? Where there's the other side, reimagining the task force. One of the main questions we all have is like, where's the task force right now? There was a resolution, right? So if maybe Greg, if you can answer that specific question of where's the police task force, not necessarily your subcommittee, police task force itself in relation to the city council action.
Sure. So in terms of, the heart of our work as we saw it, as Justin and Brian Johns have said, was to look at other models, to do our own research, to have people come in to talk, to collect information, and to present, to decide for ourselves, what we hope to see, and to present that to the task force, which we did. And presented a plan for an accountability, public safety accountability commission. The task force made some modifications of that and sent it to council. There was a council meeting where council considered it. There were a number of expressions of general support for the concept and questions about both the sort of, backing in, research findings and also some specific issues. And so then we met again as a subcommittee and worked on developing a revised proposal, which went, if I remember right, went back to the task force, then back to the council. And then at the meeting where the revised proposal came up, council approved a modified version of that. It might have actually been a substitute resolution, but something that built off of those suggestions and also reflected some changes. So council approved that, not at the last meeting, but I think the one just before that, but possibly it was two back. I'm getting a thumbs up, so possibly the one before that. I was very gratified that council saw, acted on it and found a way to create a model that was, that I think will be very, workable. As Brian Johns said, a lot depends on people, applying to work for the, applying to be on the commission and getting people who are committed to building it from scratch. So as Brian Johns said, that for the accountability subcommittee, it does sort of end at this point our work unless, we come up with something, unless we come up to something else to do as a subcommittee. And so the task force last meeting, and I think, again, as far as I know, there's no public agenda, but from what was discussed at last meeting, what'll come up next meeting will be the chance for the other subcommittees that have been, letting us take the front row seat or the driver's seat to have a chance to present their views. And there's the one that's reimagining public safety and the one on the budget. But happily, the accountability, or it's got a different name now, and I'm going to miss it. Police oversight, I think, is the name the city council passed. But happily, the idea of an oversight commission was created, and I think they're awaiting some negotiation with the Peace Officers Association before moving toward staffing, but hope to see applications open soon and look forward to people working to build it.
Wow. Okay. So congratulations. So this is a new, just so I'm clear, and I understand some about the city council commissions being on one of them, but this is going to be a brand new commission that
That's-
reports directly. It's an advisory body that would report directly to city council or would be advising city council. And so it's a brand new commission for the city of Albany, and it'd be called the Police Accountability Commission.
I
Is that
don't
right?
I think that has changed. I think
Okay.
it is, I can look up the resolution. Preston remembers. I think it's oversight or no,
I think it finally landed on policing commission.
policing
Yeah,
commission.
it was a change from public safety to policing, right? Policing commission.
I think it was proposed as public safety accountability
Right, and it was amended to policing.
commission.
Correct.
Albany Police Commission, yeah, that's right.
So some of the questions, I mean, I think, thank you so much for that summary. A lot of some of the questions that I think we had prompted, you've already answered in what you've described. Just a question, would the reimagining of public safety and budget, which are going to be presented next, would those eventually, those kinds of concepts and discussions end up being part of this commission, this advisory body eventually?
So it's a good question. I would guess it depends on exactly, what they end up presenting and what the task force as a whole ends up endorsing, and what they send forward, right? There is room in the resolution that council passed for, the recommendations on policies, recommendation on kind of staffing and related things like that. So it does seem like there's some capacity, but what was presented in the sort of initial round would also potentially involve things that go beyond what the police. The initial round at the last meeting involved some things that would go beyond what we, what the new commission would do. And I do think it's worth taking a moment. I sometimes forget like what people know and don't know. This is an occupational hazard too, right? Yes, that it was created. It's a big deal. I think that, we were not aware, we were aware of some, relatively small cities in California that have models, but none of our size or even, many of the others that do are, in my memory, in the 50 to 60,000 person. So we're notably smaller. So for council to create, the first one, and to say a city our size, if we can support a police force, we can also support this kind of public engagement, I think is a really big deal and a big step. It's not, doesn't create utopia, doesn't mean nothing can ever go wrong. But I do think it's a really big step.
Thanks. Justin, were you going to say something? And I actually have a follow-up question for you, unless you wanted to add to what Greg just said.
No, I think Greg covered it regarding your previous question of whether or not the remaining two subcommittees will inform this newly created commission. I think some of that is to be determined. The scope of those two subcommittees, of course, do have some overlap with the subject matter and processes that we addressed in accountability in our subcommittee. But those are still very much works in progress. And so I do think that while they might have some influence on or impact as far as the function of the commission and in reviewing training policies, best practices, that sort of thing, that I do think that might be an area in which that might happen.
Thanks. I was just going to say, we should just open up to Q&A at this point. Preston, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I was just going to provide a process point, not process of this meeting, but how I would see it would likely work. And thank you, panelists, for bringing this forward. There's a lot I don't know, so it's helpful to get an update on what the task force is up to. And this question, so if these other two subcommittees bring recommendations to task force, and the task force then sends those recommendations on the council in some form, they wouldn't directly go to the policing commission. So the policing commission will have to formulate a work plan proposal, just like all the other advisory bodies, is my current understanding of how it's envisioned to work. And so those items could be made or proposed as a part of that draft work plan, and or the council could add them to the draft work plan if they're not there. In terms of the charge of the commission, I agree. It seems to have the charge to have the scope. to take on, looking at, department structure, budget, things of that nature. But in terms of what I would specifically be working on over the next, well, I guess year, since the work plans go by the election. So that's kind of what we're saying is my understanding is that the commission is to be founded, created, appointed in January, unless the Citizens Task Force on Policing is extended for another 3 months in its service. And the idea is that the commission really shouldn't start until the task force ends, because there's a reasonable chance that some of the people around the task force might want to serve on the commission.
Thanks, Preston. At this point, I think we can just open up to Q&A. Does anybody have a question? They could just raise their hand, or Pete.
Thanks. Just some mechanic questions, and maybe this is too far in advance to answer these. How big might this commission be? Who might be the staff person that would be connected to it? And how often might they meet? Have any of those things been addressed as yet?
So I believe I can be corrected. I believe the council resolution created a commission of 7, which was 5 appointed by city council and 2 appointed by the school board. So for a total of 7. I think if I remember right, I think it said monthly, regular monthly meetings, but it may have been, it may not have been exactly that specific. It will, like other commissions, require staffing, but there wasn't anything in the council resolution that said who would be the staffing. So if there's been a decision made on that, I don't know. I don't know.
Thanks. Brian?
Yeah, I was curious. The people described the basic process a little bit, but I guess it came to city council once, the proposed commission, and then it went back, and then it came back to city council. The final, could somebody summarize, like, what were the basic, what was the focus on the changes that were made there? That and I don't know, is it appropriate to ask if people think that was a better end product or not, or just stay away from that?
I think you can ask.
Brian, do you want to answer that?
Not really, but I will try. I feel like the changes that were made, having had a chance to think about them, were reasonable. I was really afraid that the council would pressure us to somehow create something that was in the end toothless. I do not think that happened. But I also feel like, because this process has been kind of build it as we go along, we need to continue to work on it and press council to implement things if necessary. I don't feel like this is anywhere near finished, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Any other question or any other comments, Justin or Greg, on this one?
No, just going along with what Brian just mentioned, I do think that there were some changes to the language to make it for lack of a better term, to comply with some concerns with relevant state statutes and legislation. In other words, to make that more streamlined. I do think it captures the spirit of what we intended and what we set out to do in the subcommittee, at the accountability subcommittee, to create a body that could increase the accountability and transparency. So I think that the changes, while I won't speak to the specifics of it, I do think that allowed or will allow this this commission to achieve the purpose for which we set out to create it to do.
Go ahead, Greg.
No, they've said it well. Just I think
Okay.
The task force had approved a different model. I certainly don't want to speak for the people who aren't here from there, and it would be natural for people who went through that process to wish that it had been intact. But from my viewpoint, what passed, that it captured the essence of much of the task force proposal, which was that it be public, that it have that it be publicly appointed, as opposed to some other models, that it be regular, that it be dialogic, that it be a place where the public could come, and where also police department and whoever it designates could come and to either answer questions that they can handle at the time or absorb and answer them down the road, and that it have some model for engaging with the question of when does there need to be an independent investigation, so that it'd be able to collect data and also to be, to the degree possible, as Justin said. So I thought it really did capture many of those fundamental, core aspects of what the task force had asked for.
Thanks. Brian, did you have another question?
Yeah, I was curious if people could talk about a timeline. I heard, I think it was Preston mentioned that the new commission might not start up until the current task force is wound down. And so did people have a sense of about how many more months of meetings there would need to be, and then kind of what the timeline might be for it to wrap up its business?
Justin, do you have an answer to that one?
I believe that the duration of the task force as a whole, and correct me if I'm wrong, was a year. Is that correct? Or I'm not exactly sure.
I think it was 6 months with the possibility of extending 3 months, if I remember right, from when it was created. So we would be coming up to 6 months, November, December. And so I think it would turn on and then the resolution council passed was that the permanent commission would be seated either in January if the task force wrapped up its work before then, or in April, I guess, if the task force asked for and received a 3-month extension. We haven't yet talked about whether to request an extension, so I don't want to speak for anybody else about what, or try and predict what the likelihood of that either being asked for, being approved by the task force, or being approved by council. So sometime between January and April would be the most likely reading. Sorry, it's so hard to get an exact specific answer.
And then a follow-up question would be, I know the police present at transportation commission meetings right now on like traffic accidents and things like that. I think that's the only commission they regularly present before. Do you see the new commission will have regular presentations by the police? And would there be, what opportunities would there be for other voices to, tell other versions of what's going on?
So certainly, the intention is that, the police be there in order both to make presentations, but also to, hear public concern and, to respond. Like I said, either, then if they're comfortable or, if they hear a question raised that they need some time to look into at a future meeting. So like other public bodies, it would have, open public comment. It could agendize times for public to comment on specific agenda items and it will receive comments on those. So it should be as open to the engagement with any members of the public as possible.
Thanks. Any other questions? Nick.
Yeah, hi. So my impression is that the data that police departments are allowed to release or have to release is a pretty small amount of data around any incidents, and that, but having that data is really essential to making for the public to figure out, really what happened, or this new body to figure out, get the best information, get the best view of exactly what has happened in an incident. Have you discussed this in the task force, and do you see the task force or the new body asking the police to regularly make certain information newly available?
Brian, can you take that one?
Sure. In short, yes, we expect that the police would give us monthly reports on issues like stops or complaints. We would, if necessary, then refer that the council do some kind of independent review of those, or an independent investigation of those complaints. That would be every month. I'm sorry, I forgot the rest of your question there.
Well, it's just about the data, having the police release more data than they ever have before. It seems like that's a pretty important part of this whole thing, is that, there's going to have to be a request to release data that the police usually doesn't release.
Yes, I think the release of data should have been specifically accounted for in the resolution that we submitted, but I'm not sure that happened. But the expectation is that the police and the board would be dealing with real information provided by the police, and then make any recommendations based, at least in part, on that information.
I think there's a couple different layers of data that are important. One of which is, Nick is right about, overall protection on data that would expose, individual officers' cases or have privacy concerns. There's an aggregate amount of data, some of which the department, has on things like how many complaints, that there have been requests for that. That doesn't, disclose, what's, any officer, since we don't have a one officer town. I can imagine a scenario where it would. And it's been hard to, obtain that data and to get access to it. So some level are things that, are already known, including things we report to the state attorney general by law, but are not public on this aggregate data. Some of it is data that the police department is moving toward collection as California state law changes, and also as the department responds to other requests for information on stops, and finding a forum to disseminate that data, to talk about that data. And again, there's a need, we don't yet have that collected, but as we do, that the task force can be a place for that. And then there is the question of data on individual complaints that does raise some of the questions that Nick talked about. I'm not a lawyer. You probably are aware that this is changing now because of SB 16, which Nancy Skinner had sponsored, which actually changes the nature of what data on individual complaints and when departments, in fact, are obligated to release it. So there are some shifts that are happening in the law in that respect as well, and some of that may involve, we'll see how to carry that on. Justin, do you have anything you want to take up on this?
No, I think we covered most of it. A lot of the data is related to making available to the commission, all legally public data on police stops, things like deployment of weapons, use of force, and other information that the commission would seek. But again, that is allowable under state law. So we're not asking in that sense for anything beyond what is legally permissible.
Thanks. Other questions? Oh, thanks, Preston. Just put the resolution in the chat.
I had a question there from when we've had the police chief at our meeting a few years ago, and at one of our meetings, and I seem to recall the issue has come up either there or at other public meetings where the police department could be recording more things about what they're doing and who they're interacting with and what the race of the people they're interacting with are. But I seem to recall that there were some requirements that were coming up that to record all that, and they weren't doing it yet. They could have been doing it earlier, but they weren't. They were waiting for the requirements to actually kick in. Does that sound like, does anybody know anything about those kind of recording and reporting rules changing for police?
My memory is that the traffic stop, the stops data reporting for departments of our size was maybe going to kick in early 2023 by law, if I'm right, and that the chief had prior to this sometime earlier, I think in 2021, or maybe it was in 2020, as I think about it, may have been more likely in late summer or fall of 2020. The chief said that the department is moving toward having this in place to start collecting this coming January, I believe. I'm kind of talking without notes, so I could be slightly off, but an effort to speed up to match what some of the larger departments were required to do in response to desire from within the public for this information, in a more timely manner. So I think that would allow for the dissemination of some of the stuff that Brian, Johnson, Justin talked about, of these aggregate stops and aggregate stops by some of the different markers, that demographic and other markers that the state had set as the standards for this information.
Preston?
Yeah, I believe it was in the staff report that went to council that the police department actually started gathering this data in February of this year. I don't know that much about the law, but from reading the staff report, I guess that the law was structured so that they had to report this data to the Department of Justice. And so they picked a software tool that transmitted this data to the Department of Justice, but that tool didn't have a a report out feature. And so they're working with the vendor to actually build that. So in other words, they can enter the data, they can send the data, but it doesn't really have any like good formatting tools for reporting the data, which, okay, it's a little odd, but they said they're working on it. But I mean, I think so that's very important, but they have started collecting the data, at least according to the staff report. So we want the data to be able to be reported out, but if you don't have any data to report out eventually, then that's a worse situation. So pretty soon, we'll have a year's worth of data if we can get out of there.
Nick, did you?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, I want to, state law has been mentioned, and so I just want to throw in a state law question in case anyone knows. But I'll throw also in a plug in case people are interested in podcasts. There's a great podcast called On Our Watch, which describes a change in one of the changes in state law that allowed more information to be released about certain complaints or certain incidents. So I suggest people who are check that out if they listen to podcasts. But what was the thing that, so California was one of the holdouts for a certain law. And what was that law that recently did get signed by the governor and allowed California to join most of the other states? Does anyone know? Can anyone describe that one? Go ahead.
You get a sense I'm an avid reader of the newspaper for this reason. As I understand it, California was one of 3 states that didn't have a law that provided a mechanism for decertifying police officers or peace officers, and now it does. So that was pretty shocking.
Yeah, that was wild that California was one of the only outlying states on that. Yeah, there we go. Greg Downs also posted a URL to that same podcast. I guess as long as I've got the stage, I'll throw in another question. Maybe it's a little bit of a provocative question, but I don't mean it necessarily to be. But why should Albany be the only city, or maybe one of the only small cities with such a commission? That continually is pointed out by one of the council members. So what do the panelists think about Albany being this small town with one of the only, or maybe the only small town with such a commission?
I have opinions, but I think I've been answered a bunch of them. Brian, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think the answer to that is really pretty simple. Given the amount of attention and public support that has been generated around this topic, it's clear that the citizens, or at least a good number of citizens in Albany, want some form of police accountability. Now, from my perspective, and I've said this before in other meetings, I feel like the goal of the task force and the desire behind creating that body was to create a condition under which everybody in Albany could feel safe about their police force and could feel that they could bring a complaint if necessary, and it wouldn't be swept under the rug. So I feel like those goals are incumbent upon a democracy. And my opinion was it was a no-brainer.
So,
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
So the question related to, I guess, the novel status of Albany being a jurisdiction that's considerably smaller than any other who's undertaken to do something similar with a commission that has the same task and purpose as what the resolution sets out. I think that the focus on the size of Albany, I think can sometimes be a distraction, right? And that's not to say that there's sort of a one size fits all solution for a lot of these problems. But I think the benefits of, as the whereas clauses in the resolution state, of setting out and establishing checks and balances and public accountability are really what are at the heart of this commission. The ability of it to examine policies and practices, including those that have negatively impacted community members, to research best practices in other jurisdictions, and identifying alternatives. I think that's really what is sort of captured in this commission. So I don't think that the fact that Albany is considerably smaller is too particularly concerning, given the possible or the positive benefits from having a commission such as this that increase trust with the community in areas of policing.
Yeah, to me, I don't think we'll be the smallest. Well, in terms of there, I think there'll be other cities of our size. A number of others are exploring it. It seems like an idea that came into larger departments decades ago, and an idea that many smaller towns are exploring now as they think about their responses to the increase in public attention to this issue, broader public attention to this issue across the country. So I doubt that we'll stand out for long. And I also do feel like this sort of echoes what what Brian and Justin said. As they used to say, when I was a kid, one takes the vow, one takes the blame. If we're going to choose to have a police department, we're in my view, we're morally obligated to the pieces that go with that. And that includes the responsibility on us that the police department acts in our name. And that includes us all, not just council at any one iteration, but all of us taking seriously the responsibility, the moral responsibility that puts on all of us to think about what's done in our name. So to me, it seems like, I understand that that these ideas, evolve and gain, traction over time. But if we're not big enough to say that we're going to have, a volunteer public commission, that can hear from the public and receive and broadcast this data and make recommendations about when there needs to be an independent investigation, then we're not big enough to have a police department. So to me, it seems to me like it goes hand in hand with the decision that we're capable of supporting a police department and that we need one. It seems to me that follows directly from that therefore we need to embrace all the obligations that puts on all of us as residents of Albany to think about how to manage that responsibility that as a city we've elected.
Thank you. All those answers are really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Preston?
Yeah, I was going to share some of what I shared as my council member on this, which is Albany is uniquely positioned to be the first in doing things. I learned this from my neighbor who pointed me to a Washington Post analysis a few years ago. And this analysis was looking at the balance of contributions to campaigns on the liberal conservative. And Albany came out of that as one of the 10 most liberal cities in the entire country. I'm not saying anything I didn't say in the council meeting. And so to me, that confers an obligation. If we're all going to collect ourselves here, then we have an obligation to actually do things that lead, try stuff. On the other side, though, it is a small city, it is a small staff, and so I do have concern in that regard. With the creation of this body, we now have 11 standing advisory bodies. I looked at I can't remember, the 5 next larger and smaller cities statewide, and then in the Bay Area. And there's no other, I think all the other cities that are close to us in size in the state have half or fewer the number of advisory bodies we do. The only 2, well, there were 3 in the Bay Area that were close to our size. El Cerrito was 1, which, as I said in the meeting, I'm not that enthused about because they're in huge financial trouble. So that's, I'm not saying because they have a lot of advisory bodies, but, and the other 2 were Lafayette and Orinda, which obviously are far wealthier than we do. I don't know what their staff headcount is compared to Albany, but I got to think it's larger. So as I said in the meeting, I'm gonna be pushing to eliminate 1 or 2 advisory bodies next time around. Look at the work that's being done and make a choice, because we just can't keep asking staff to staff more and more of these bodies. But I do agree. I mean, to me, this is one like transportation and parks, rec, and open space. It goes to the core of city services.
Thanks. Anybody else? Any other questions? Let's see. I don't see any other hands up. So thank you, Brian, Justin, and Greg for being here and having this conversation with us. And really interesting to meet you all who just sort of kicked off this formation of this and got to the point where it's in resolution. So really interesting to hear the process, and thank you for all your great work to get us to this place as a city. I think I'm just going to give it back to, actually, Nick is here now. So Nick, do you want to take the reins from here? Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, I'll just, I am itching to ask one final question though. Brian and Justin and Greg, and thank you for being here too, by the way, but is it going okay? And is the process going okay? Is it terrible? Is it great? Is it, what do you think? Anyone want to jump in on that? Or
yeah, I feel like the process has been pretty good, as good as I would have expected, and not as bad as I feared. I feel like talking about this and talking about it with the police chief and 2 representatives of the union and the task force members, it's gone pretty well. I tried not to become too disappointed or expect too much based on the initial response at the council. So I feel like it's going well. But again, I feel like this will require continued diligence and energy.
Yeah, I just
Thank
say
you.
+1. I think that captures it well.
Oh, Preston, you want to jump in there? Okay.
Well, I actually have a question, and thank you, Brian. I've never met with the Peace Officers Association, and that's indicated by the fact that I think I referred to them as Police Officers Association, which, not a good faux pas on my part. The Albany Firefighters Association reached out to me shortly after election to meet. We spoke, I think we met 3 times and probably spoke a total of 5 hours. I mean, it was, really, really good meeting. I did meet with the police chief, to get briefed after I was elected, but anyway, so, and I think I was copied by Brian and Greg on some exchange that they had with the spokesperson for the Peace Officers Association. And so I replied and said, yeah, if you'd ever like to talk, I'd love to talk. And it's complete silence in response. So I don't have any, I don't have any traction with that organization in terms of, what it's about, what its perspective is. So this is a long-winded way of saying, could you elaborate on your experience of meeting with them? Because I don't know anything. I'm completely in the dark on that.
Sorry, Preston, can you repeat which body are you talking about, or which organization?
The Albany Peace Officers Association. And so that the some or all the members of the accountability subcommittee did the good work of reaching out to and meeting with the Peace Officers Association to get their perspective on what they were proposing, which I really applaud you for, because it's more work and it's easy to think, well, it's just going to be negative, so let's just skip that. So thank you for doing that. And so I'm just curious to hear more nuance from what kind of vibe you got. I don't know if you met with just one of them, if there were a number of people there, any more information you can give me. I thrive on information.
I'll just give a couple of pieces of background and then let Brian and Justin weigh in. So first, I think, want to thank the chief helped, set that in motion. So that's to his credit. And then, although obviously they met on their own accord. And we met with two members, and the head, I think it had recently turned over. So I and possibly others had spoken in separate, in a ride along I did with a former head of the Peace Officers Association, but not in the context of, more in the context of his role in the department. And so we met with Officer Holly Matthews, who's newly, not that long ago, elected as the new chair, and also with the vice chair, whose name has just slipped my mind. And so, yeah, in terms of summarizing that, why don't I turn over to Brian and Justin?
What I'll say about that meeting was that it was an opportunity for both the subcommittee members as well as the police folks to share some of both our concerns and to dispel some perhaps misconceptions over what this commission would do, the scope of its work, the intent of its mission. And so, I would characterize that meeting as one where we shared some information as far as what we're setting out to achieve. I perceive that meeting allowed us to allay some apprehensions and anxieties over what this commission and the task force as a whole was considering or setting out to do, and also a chance to inform the process as we sort of wordsmithed and crafted the language of our proposal. And so I think that was our thought going into that meeting and what came out of it.
Brian, do you have any final thoughts about that?
No, I don't.
Okay, I am back here. Sorry, I had to step away for just a quick second. All right, well, great. Thank you for that. And I also want to put a plug in that one of our panelists, Greg Downs, will be also in a meeting next week, about a week from now. You'll be at the League of Women Voters. I wasn't able to find the exact invitation, but if you go to their website, which I put in the chat there, you should be able to find that event. It is exactly a week from now, isn't it? Next Thursday at 7?
That's what's in my calendar. I think, yes. So this Thursday, 7 there. Anybody can't find the Zoom, just email me. My email is searchable since I'm a public employee, but it's my Gmail is also GregoryPDowns@gmail. And I'm glad to send you the one they sent me, the link they sent me.
Okay, great. Yeah, well, thanks very much again for all our panelists for being here. And we did invite, you might have said this already, Julia, that we invited one other person and she could not make it as a panelist, but I'm grateful to have the panelists who did have come and talk to us today. And thanks everyone else for being here and listening. I certainly learned a number of things, and I think this is really helpful. Thanks again.
Thank you all.
All right, and you're welcome
Feel free to stay if you want.
Yeah, you're welcome.
We're not
stay for
kicking
the
you
rest of the
out.
meeting.
Thank you.
not too
I
much
just got
more.
home, so I need to catch my kids. But
That's fine, no problem. I just
Yeah, of course you're welcome to stay. So thanks again, and we won't be offended if you have to go. Let's see. I guess I can go back and cover, since I wasn't able to join right away, I can cover the Alameda County Democratic Party, which was kind of interesting. I wish I knew the exact action that was taken, but an action was taken against Fremont Mayor Lily May for her actions that were seen as trying to come up with the right words. She did not, the LGBTQIA plus community did not feel very good about some of her actions as a school board member and as a city council member. They felt that community felt not supported by her. And so, and the county Democratic Committee took action against her, and I'm not exactly sure what that action is. If anyone else knows, please let me know. But it's at least a censure, if not removing her from the county Democratic Committee. So that was quite something. And the other thing that's quite something was that there's a group in the Democratic Party in California. There's been a movement to ban fossil fuel and police union money from the as those organizations as contributors to the Democratic Party, as financial contributors. And so there is going to be a special meeting this weekend of the California Democratic Party to talk about that. And for what I understand, there's some concern by the California Democratic Party that, that where if money has to be replaced from donations such as these, where is that money going to come from? But there's some people who feel very strongly about this, especially about the fossil fuel industry contributions, and are really working hard to get the California Democratic Party out of that business, or away from that business. Any questions? Yeah.
If I could just share my screen real quick, because I saw this on the agenda and try to get some more background on what's going on. It has an interesting nexus with election methods. Let's see if I can figure this out. Here we go. So this paragraph I thought was interesting. So she ran first.
I'm not seeing your screen. Are other people seeing it?
I see it.
Yes, I'm seeing it.
Oh,
okay. Well, I'll just, yeah. Okay. So I'll read. She apparently jumped in on the assembly race, and that I think that's kind of what triggered a lot of this. And it says May's support for a number of Southern Alameda County conservatives. She received support from a number of Southern Alameda County conservatives, including Steve Cho and Fremont Councilmember Yang Shao, which also rankled local Democrats. Shao, a Christian conservative, campaigned against same-sex marriages and once labeled Martin Luther King Jr. as a philanderer. Both are listed as supporters for her nascent state Senate campaign. It was interesting because when she was the first time she was elected to mayor of Fremont, I think it was 2016, and she got 53% of the vote. Second time she got 48%. Because there were 3 candidates and the other 2 candidates split. And Yang Shao, and this is what I thought was particularly interesting. So here's the results of his election in 2018.
Sorry to interrupt you. I'm going to stop recording. Just want to make sure people knew that.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So Yang Shao, so Fremont went from at-large elections to by district elections.